Hello, everyone, and welcome to AARP's third fireside chat on the future of skills. At AARP, we firmly believe that all ages bring something to the workforce, and we're very interested in looking at the skill landscape and skills-based hiring and all of those related topics from an age-inclusive lens. I'm Heather Tinsley-Fix, and I'm joined today by Carolyn Tandy, Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer at Humana. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Heather. So great to see you as always.
Yes, great to see you as always. I'm always happy to have a conversation with you. So I want to just kick things off with my first question. So there's been a lot of emphasis on taking advantage of skills-based hiring as a way to address equity and diversity in the workforce. So my question is, do you think that's possible? And how do you think employers can come up with the enablers to do that?
Absolutely, yes. And I think it's increasingly important. Employers should know and understand that there is a lot of talent, and we need to be able to hone in on our skills, not just for today's workforce, but really for the workforce and needs of the future. Our employers have to set up the opportunity, set up the condition really for our environment to be successful into the future. And that includes providing a clear understanding for those who do the work and the hiring, in particular, those who are in those roles, making those important hires, to clearly understand why degrees are important in some ways, but guess what? Factors other than degrees are super important into the future. Those skills are what we really want to hone in on. How are we able to elevate the skills that we're needing? And less so about the degrees themselves. And I tell you, honestly, the pandemic, I think in some ways broke some of this conventional thinking, that instead of accelerating the notion that degrees are what's needed, everyone is really thinking again and clearly around what's needed from a skill-based perspective. What are we needing for the exact position? What are some of those long-term relationships that have maybe been cultivated through those skills that could benefit the organization differently, more so than just a degree? Skill-based hiring, it picks up on some of those benefits, Heather, really around, again, benefits that may have been gained maybe in community college or workforce training, boot camps. I think of certificate programs, even military service or on-the-job learning. There's so many different ways that we can think about the benefit of skill-based hiring differently. And this is the future. The future will balance this way of thinking to make sure that we're able to attract a wide net of our talent. So employers really need to hone in on these important ways to think of our talent into the future.
Yeah, and I love what you said about gaining skills in sort of non-traditional ways.
Yes.
At AARP, we often emphasize that if you've taken a period off to do caregiving, particularly, definitely of children, but also of elders, navigating the healthcare system, making sure that all the medications are organized. Those are the kind of skills that you're gaining in a non-job setting, which certainly should be taken into account. So
I have to share just a quick story about that because I think it's personally relevant to me. When I was in my job in Washington, it was very important and buttoned up to say, this was where you went to school, this is where you went to college. But I remember having a mentor say to me once, at some point, none of that stuff is going to matter. It's going to matter what you know. It's going to matter what you can do and how you're able to really benefit and share that story about what you can do. So I've always held that personally in the ways that I've thought about my career, as well as, again, think more broadly as someone who hires others to think about them in their totality of what they've been able to, again, bring more broadly than just a degree. It's really, again, about those skills that they're able to pick up on.
Right. Absolutely. So talking about kind of shifting the thinking around job descriptions, what proportion of jobs do you think could be recruited for entirely on the basis of demonstrated skills? I mean, realistically, how important are four-year degrees to a certain percentage of the jobs that are out there?
I really think this is going to be an ongoing question that's going to be debated for a while. And I truly think it's unknown at this point what proportion of the numbers or types of the jobs. But as we continue to progress into this new frontier, over the next couple of years, I think it's going to be important for us to clarify what we are doing and to be able to test those numbers. I think there are going to be some areas that are really like low-hanging fruit. And information technology, for example, comes to mind as an area of focus in extreme opportunities. Sales, for another example, or project management, even process improvement and consulting jobs. Those are the ways of the future that really, again, we really hone in on and look at people based on their skills, Heather, rather than, again, really the degree that's behind it. So I think it's really going to be important for us to begin to think about how we measure the skills that matter for these positions and be able to quantify that in our job recs, be able to quantify that in, again, how we're training our hiring leaders to think more broadly than what is on the page, even using some tactics to darken or be able to take off of the resumes that are being presented information like degrees and raise and make equally the skills that are important to the job.
Right. Yeah. And I love this idea of, let's start small with the types of jobs where there are robust training and certificate programs like project management and IT. That's a great way to start to sort of, build that skill internally or that culture internally. That's a really great suggestion. So in terms of building on that idea, do you think that a skills-based labor market, as we're kind of easing our way into this, will make it easier for workers to cyclically reskill? In other words, the emphasis on skills means that, employers are going to have to continue to pay attention to reskilling efforts.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a great idea in concept right now. Employers are continuing to be focused on how best to achieve their business objectives with the workforce they currently have. But it doesn't mean that they should have or don't have the willingness to reskill the workforce, the existing workforce, and be able to, again, bring them towards that competitive standpoint, competitive advantage. Employers like my own, we're exploring the ways that we are willing to reskill our current workforce, which will prove for us to, again, gain that advantage with a multidimensional workforce. We need to foster a culture where it's understood by all how important this is to our future. This will help us set the stage for our employers more broadly to be more agile in reskilling the workforce, and again, be able to think about that in terms of what the associate experience is. I think it's also important for our individual associates, our employees, to think more proactively about how they want to engage in this effort. And we talk to people on our teams about being able to keep themselves prepared for opportunities to really be able to document and take advantage of skill increasing opportunities, as well as to be able to how to market those opportunities. There's so many ways, different ways to learn, particularly in the digital era that we live in. But it's entirely possible for us to learn and to certify skills without attending traditional learning programs.
So talking again about those hiring managers, like what culturally are the pain points? I mean, some of them might be operational. So, the technology you use, the applicant tracking systems and stuff, but what are some of the cultural barriers to adopting a skills-based approach? What I'm kind of asking is, how do we resist the temptation if we have a slate of candidates not to gravitate towards the ones that have degrees from four-year institutions, especially prestigious ones?
Absolutely. We refer to that, honestly, Heather, as pedigree bias. What we mean by that is, especially when it comes to some of the names that we know, we sit up a little straighter when we see those names come across, and people tend to lean in and think that because someone has a degree in one area or another, that somehow speaks to their skill set. It assumes that because you went to an Ivy League college, that somehow you have a better education and they're more prepared for the workforce versus someone that may not have a degree or may not have attended an Ivy League college. So that bias is really there and needs to be addressed. We've also been led to believe that it becomes essential in order to have a professional workforce that people need to have degrees, and that is just not the case. This is going to take some effort on our part to undo some of that thinking, that mindset as well as to condition and make sure folks understand that bias is not good in any form. And in this case, it's not good for us either, especially as we look towards our future. Remember that we have been advocating for many, many years in order to get ahead, that no matter what, we must have a degree. So we're going to have to change that mindset and undo some of that bias. This will remain true in some cases, but not in every case. And so we need to really think about how we're able to train our leaders to think more broadly around the skills that are needed for a job versus, again, the pedigree or the institutions that, again, make people kind of sit up more straightly and think that that is, again, going to contribute to their workforce, when in actuality, it doesn't prove that way.
Yeah, and when you talk about, or when you look at a job description, a lot of times that requirement for a 4-year degree is a bullet in and of itself. In other words, it's not really attached to the skill. There's like, here are the skills we need, and we need a 4-year degree. And it doesn't seem to sort of, be necessary. So I think that's a really good point. And I also am curious about how you might say hire for, okay, you list all the skills, but then hire for, let's say you have a great candidate who's got 2/3 of those skills, that they show an aptitude for learning and a resilience and a determination. Thinking that way too around, what are some of the soft skills that a candidate might need, and how could they sort of make up for, a lack of some of, a portion of the skills.
Oh, this is super important because it's so very difficult to credential for soft skills, right? But you think about the social skills, the leadership, the communication, the teamwork, all the things that we can name that really speak to the life experience, the work experience, how someone can contribute to the culture. Universities and colleges don't teach that, right? And so it's really about what the person itself can be able to contribute. So employers are going to have to mitigate this and be able to figure out ways to make it part of the evaluation process. And on the back end, make sure that equally our hiring managers are in a position to be able to measure it equally, as well as be able to measure what that looks like in terms of the needs of the culture of their team. It's going to be super important for us to find ways to measure it, but right now it's quite difficult to credential it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we are really interested in here at AARP because, a lot of soft skills are developed on the job and developed over time. So if you have a multi-generational workforce, if you have a good mix of ages in your workforce, you can really leverage those older workers to help not only provide those skills in service of their own jobs, but also to mentor others and help develop those skills with the younger generations coming up. So, and it's very interesting. Like, how do you credential for something like resilience? I mean, it's an interesting question. So,
but guess what? We know when we see it, right?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, absolutely. So Carolyn, anything else that you want to add? I mean, I know that Humana is embarking, kind of taking some steps in this direction. It's sort of new to you all, but any perspectives on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. Humana has partnered with many other organizations to be part of 110. 110 is a national organization and mission really focused in on hiring 1 million African Americans into family sustaining jobs over 10 years. We are a founding member of that organization. We are proud to be a part of that organization, partially because of its focus on skill-based hiring. And so being able to say that from a workforce perspective, from a diverse talent perspective, but also, again, thinking about how are we able to think about into the future, our workforce needs differently. Skill-based hiring is and will be part of our strategy. And so that is, again, beneficial to, I know, our members, our communities, but also I know to your members too, that we're proud, again, to be able to hire into our organization. So really excited for what that will mean for us into the future.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's always such a pleasure to talk with you. And yes, absolutely. And everyone, watch this space. We'll be having more chats with experts over the next few months. Okay, so thanks, everyone.